Welcome to Rise, Hope and Healing After Sexual Betrayal. I am so grateful to be here today, joined by Dr. Skinner. Welcome back. Glad to have you here today.
MaryAnn, it's good to be with you and with the listeners and viewers.
Dr. Skinner, we've recently been talking about rebuilding the foundation. So I'm starting to stabilize a little bit. I'm beginning to rebuild my foundation. So we've talked about my faith foundation, looking at who am I in a broad sense, especially if there's been spiritual trauma or betrayal. Last week, we were looking at our identity of who am I now? How do I figure out who I am? What's my reality? And so, Dr. Skinner, where do we go next with this? Where do you feel like the next piece of the puzzle is to reshaping and rebuilding our foundation after betrayal?
I think, MaryAnn, for me, if I was to categorize the next part of it, which is research based, I want to look at how the betrayal has influenced my perception socially. So, a couple of things from research, I started asking the question after discovery, did you reach out for support? And if you did reach out for support, how effective was it for you? And that question, coupled with what happens to my perception of trust, trusting even people close to me, was I hold back from people with whom I used to be close, which could be family members, friends, and so forth. And many people are also holding back from their peers. So, from a purely research perspective, we understand that I no longer know who to trust in society. And even when I have reached out, I'm often holding back from people that I used to be able to trust. So, to me, this is a foundational element of healing and moving forward, finding people with whom you can open up and feel that you can trust them. And the other part of that is how I see globally this society that we live in, because I can begin to feel like there aren't safe people anywhere.
I know that ties into our criteria B of PTSD. There's isolation and avoidance. And as I've run different support groups online, or even my clients in my office so many times, I say, who have you told about this? And so many clients will say, I haven't told anybody. Can you speak to what you see? And I compare and contrast what you see when I haven't told anybody versus I've joined a support group and I've got some close friends that I've talked to. What's the difference there? What do you see?
Difference in terms of outcome for the person who's been betrayed, or just difference in them internally, or both?
I think both would be a great.
Let me just do it through a story. A few years ago, I was working with an individual who, for I want to say about 20 years, had not shared her story. And as she started talking about it with me in the office, I was literally the first person who knew this secret. And the weight of that for 20 years of isolation, you stop, there's not a lot of joy. And so in her life, she had come to the conclusion, this is just my life. And so in that situation, she'd pulled back from friends, she'd pulled back from family members. And the family members had identified there was something off. And as she started talking and opening up, she realized that she had been carrying this weight all by herself. And she concluded, I can't do it anymore. And so the next step was reaching out into a world that she didn't know how they were going to respond. But their response actually was part of her healing process because she felt understood. So that's one example of 20 years of isolation, secrecy. I honestly think it's very hurtful for our body not to have a space to put those traumatic or those difficult experiences. I think it's difficult on the body to retain that. And so that's one. The next part, socially, when we look at outcomes for recovery and healing, group support, MaryAnn, is like the lead indicator of what really it triggers people into better outcomes. And so I think having family and the other is so important.
I couldn't agree more with you, Dr. Skinner. I am wondering what you've heard, maybe what your research shows. I don't know if you have research on this or not, but I think about some of my clients who I'll say, hey, I want you to get into a group. This is so important. This is such a helpful part. But I have some clients who struggle. Like that is such a big hurdle. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Why does that, in your opinion, feel like such a big struggle when you've been betrayed? What are those barriers that you often see?
In my experience, when I bring that up with clients as a possibility, how would you feel about attending a group? That one of the more common barriers is, what if I meet somebody that I know? So that's one. The second one, and this is a very common one, they get into that kind of a setting, and that first or second session, when they start hearing other stories, it can be so triggering because they begin to wonder, did my spouse do that too? And did they do this? And so those are the two common ones. And I have found the more effective group is to start off looking internally, what has this experience done to me? And then those stories start to come out. And because you've felt safe in this group and you start to develop those friendships, that's when those stories of what you've been dealing with becomes more effective. So I think sometimes they get overwhelmed in the beginning because they're hearing so many stories. And so I think there's a couple of fears there. It's like, oh, is it going to make it worse? And I've found that we educate them. Here's the format. Here's the structure of what's most productive. And so I think it's important that we create the parameters for productive groups and support rather than just, how do I say, just going to any group. You have to be attuned to yourself because in some groups I've actually heard, I went to the group and I felt like they were minimizing the experience. And there's so much potential that could go wrong that it's important to find a good structured group that can really validate the PTSD symptoms, really validate what you're experiencing, and then not overwhelm your nervous system through all of the stories that you're hearing.
Mm. I have two thoughts on that. I'm hearing you talk about these barriers, the fear of showing up and being activated and making my pain even worse than it was. That makes sense. So I want to just validate. It makes total sense. I don't want to go because I'm not going to be able to handle it.
Mm.
My pain is at a 5 right now and I'm managing it. And so the fear might be if I go, it's going to get triggered. I can't contain it. I'm just in survival right now. So that makes a lot of sense that that could be a barrier there. For our listeners, if you're thinking, "Ah, I'm not sure about group, it can be hard." Oftentimes we talk about 12-step groups. There are groups that are paid groups that are led by therapists or that are psychoeducational that are really good. If you're going to a 12-step group, I know oftentimes it can feel, "Hey, welcome. We're glad you're here. We're going to do some reading together. And then we're going to have a really quick introduce yourself. And then you can have a really quick share if you'd like." And you can show up to a group and feel really still unseen and unheard.
Mm.
And so if you are going to a 12-step group, I would encourage you to stay for the parking lot meeting. Usually, even online, they say just if you're walking out, you'd start talking to somebody and
Yeah.
you'd stand in the parking lot for 15, 20 minutes. And I often see that parking lot as being the place where people actually start to connect. Because I can go to a group and still feel super disconnected, but having that unstructured space is a really important component, in my opinion, of a group.
And especially as it develops over time, I mean, some of my favorite stories, a few years ago, I was running a group and we went to not quite 2 years. One of my favorite groups ever. Over time, they progressed to the point where they would come in and say, "Hey, we think we need to talk about this. We've talked about it. We went to lunch together. We talked about what we needed." They had a written list of topics they wanted to cover. A few months later, they came in and said, "We don't think we need to meet every week. Could we meet every other week?" And then it was like, "Can we meet once a month?" And I love it when it's guided by the clients that way. And then you start hearing stories of the messaging. And yeah, we went to lunch together and we spent this person's birthday together. And you start to see this community of support developing. And then you no longer feel isolated. And I think the group is not just the content. In fact, I think it's more about the relationships that is the healing component. The content can be very helpful and insightful, and you can learn a lot. I think it's the connections in relationship to have somebody that you relate to that is one of the real leading indicators of what successful people do and get it what they get out of group.
I love that. I have clients that struggle, especially with 12 steps, because of the higher power component.
Mhm.
And if that's not part of their belief system or their faith system, it can feel really triggering. And so, as you said, my focus in sending my clients to group is okay, the contents that, and that's okay. But what I'm wanting you to do by going to group is create relationships. Find people, get on the group chat so that at 2 in the morning when you're struggling, you can send out a SOS and you have people that can be there that you can respond to. Find a couple people. You think, "Oh, she was kind. I liked her responses. Maybe I can text her." And one of the hardest things I think is leaving group and saying like, "Okay, I need to have a contact here." Oh, is this so uncomfortable? And the easiest way to do that is just to send a text and say, "Hey, how was your day?
Mm.
Hey, how are you doing?" But that's another hurdle that Ooh, I don't want to bother anybody. Ooh, it's okay for that 1 hour a week, but I don't know how to cross that into my daily life.
And when I see that done well, some groups merge and they connect really well that way. Not all groups do that. And I can't create that because I'm not the one who's having that outside communication. If they have a good leader, they're going to do that well. But the interesting thing about it is, over and over again, when I see groups do that, I've seen a couple of groups really do it well. And I'll never forget one lady. She's like, we spent birthdays together. The husband was out of town. I went over and slept. We talked, we played, we had fun. And it was so nurturing when you haven't had somebody and all of a sudden you have people who genuinely get you. It really is a game changer. I think that Sue Johnson talks about this concept of how emotions and connection settles our nervous system because we're wired for connection. And I think after betrayal, that connection, that wiring, you start to question everybody. And I think the repair process is you start to feel a connection on a deeper level in ways that you maybe never have before.
And when you show up to group in your deepest pain and you are vulnerable and other people are allowed to witness that, that's where attachment happens. I know one of the groups I led years ago, there are two ladies that both ended up divorcing, and they had never met before, but they went to a divorce conference together and they were roommates and they both become therapists and they built this strong relationship that's continued for years and years later because of that. Are you there for me? Can you be there
Mhm.
for me in these darkest, hardest hours? That person saw me, they heard me, they validated my pain. So I want to point out the beauty of what we're talking about here, which is such the opposite of I'm going to go and be triggered. I'm going to go and this will be hard because it might be hard. It will be hard. It's hard to share your story and to say, this happened to me. But the potential of lifelong support and friendship from people who you're not carrying a mask around, there's no hiding, there's no pretense. This is my raw, ugly world, and I'm accepted there. That's invaluable.
Yeah. And Marianne, I think it's important to understand that we talk about the very beginning of this. Then we talk about the end of it where there's this deep friendship and bond. The journey between that is really, it starts with these crucial moments, these difficult conversations, like somebody finally understands me. And when you can get into those kind of conversations, then you don't feel so isolated and alone. And you start to realize, here's the question, safe, not safe. And when you are experiencing betrayal, when you don't know safe, I've heard people say, I don't know if I can trust my mom and dad anymore.
Right?
And that shift into, I know this person is safe for me. I can open up. They understand me. Many years ago, I bought a book called The Power of One. The general concept from that book was it takes one person, one relationship to heal wounds that could last generations of time. One human being that steps in and says, you matter. I see you. You feel felt in my presence. It just takes one of those to begin to regulate the nervous system and say, this is my person. And sometimes when we have that, then we start to see, oh, and that person is also trustworthy. But we have to start with a one. And to me, that's really important.
I love that. And I know this doesn't 100% correlate, but as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about benevolent childhood experiences. And we have the adverse childhood experiences, and these are 10 questions of experiences that we had that were probably traumatic before the age of 18. And we say, why does that look different for you? You're not responding like I'm expecting. And the benevolent childhood experiences is, was there someone who thought you were special? Was there someone that you could confide in or that you felt safe with? And that principle, even after the age of 18, also completely applies.
When I do group therapy, I will often do what's called attachment focused EMDR. And the general concept is trying to find a nurturer, somebody who you would identify as this person is a nurturer to me. And it's so interesting, Marianne, when I've talked with people and they say, I can't think of a human being that is currently living that I feel could fit into that description of nurturer. Well, of course, they're going to be in our offices. I mean, think about it. If you don't have anybody, then when you go shopping, when you go to the gym, when you go to church, when you go to any social place, your mind and your defense system and nervous system is saying, where's Waldo? In other words, where's the tiger? Where's the problem here? Where's the threat here? Because I don't know if I can trust people in general. So your body is constantly looking for Where's the threat? And when we're stuck in that mode, it's really hard to heal. Transitioning, when we find that nurture, and I've had people say they're not living, but there was a grandma. And when we do that, it's amazing to me the tears that come from the conversation. And can I say it, the imagined conversation of nurturer in those core moments of just being with them in their pain? Oh, it's a powerful experience. Literally, that's one of my favorite things to do in groups. And recently, I was doing a couples group with this, and I'm going to say almost everybody, all of the participants, were crying when they went through that exercise.
And the beauty of that is if I'm connecting with bringing in my grandmother or somebody who's an attachment figure who I trust, that person will speak truth to me. They cut through the course of beliefs, they cut through the doubts and the fears, and they speak truth, which is a life raft. Where else do you want to go with that, Dr. Skinner?
What I would want the listeners, viewers to consider is how they're seeing relationships as a result of the betrayal. I think that's a very valuable journaling exercise. Like, how has this influenced how I see relationships? I think that's really valuable to do that kind of introspection and look internally. And then not just how is it influencing me, but how do I want to be relationally? And that then you'd be an internal battle. It's like part of me wants connection, the other part is scared to death. So then I have to look and identify the people that I believe could be there for me. In my book, Treating Trauma from Sexual Betrayal, I share a story where there was an individual who couldn't find anybody, parents, family. But when we started reflecting, went back to a childhood friend from high school, those adolescent years, a friend who was there. And that story forever will be stuck with me because she reached out through Facebook. They connected, they started talking, and she flew to where her friend was and opened up and had a incredibly powerful experience, realizing that her friend had been through life's challenges as well. And together they formed a long lost friendship that was renewed. And that's the kind of a thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for connection because connection is going to be what's going to help people heal. And that's just an example of that process.
Thank you. That's a beautiful example. And for our listeners and viewers, if you don't know Dr. Skinner very well, if you are viewing on YouTube, you can see his backdrop is a double bookcase completely full of books. And Dr. Skinner is a learner and a reader. And so a lot of my best books have come from Dr. Skinner's recommendations. And recently, Dr. Skinner, you shared with us, hey, there's this new book by Amir Levine, and I think it's Rachel Neller, and it's focusing on attachment. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the concepts that it shares about exclusion. And I wonder if you want to talk about that because I think that really ties into this. When we've been betrayed, we've been excluded even from our marital or our relational contract. And so this is huge right here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this ties in, Dr. Skinner.
Yeah, so interesting with this. So in his book, Secure, Amir Levine shares an incredible research study on exclusion and what happens to us internally when we get excluded. The example that he gave was profound. It was, let's say two people are playing with the ball and the third person comes in and says, hey, can I play? And so we start playing with this third person and then we exclude them. And what happens to them? The exclusion is not good for their health, their mental health. It's not good for them. So then they did a follow-up, and these people were part of the Ku Klux Klan. They weren't really, but they said that, and they brought another person in. And when that person was excluded, you think, well, they probably wouldn't care because of these people's beliefs about race. It didn't matter. They still felt excluded. And the third part of that story was now every time you're excluded, I'm going to give you money. Same thing. If I feel excluded, it doesn't matter if it's racist. It doesn't matter if it's about money. If it's just people who I know, if I feel excluded, it's not good for my mental health and my overall well-being. That research is absolutely fascinating when we think about being left out of something.
Right, and if I recall, they were doing this and so they could see what parts of the brain were lighting up. And what they found is the way that it manifests in the body was the same as physical pain. And they said, you could take a Tylenol for this. Tylenol works on this. And so we think, oh, it's no big deal, just brush it off. But no, our brain and our body respond like physical pain to this. And so it's a really big deal as we're talking about betrayal and exclusion and our need to be included. What matters is the inclusion and finding a safe place.
And MaryAnn, I often say, I don't think you heal in isolation. I just don't see it. I haven't seen it in my entire career. I have not seen people make progress the way those individuals do who get that connection, who reach out for support, who finally start sharing that story. It's cathartic to speak and be validated.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a client I had early in my career. Oh, it was such a challenge for her to go to group. She had so many fears. Felt like we were almost just trying to drag her, getting her there. And the next session I had with her after group, she burst into tears and said, "MaryAnn, it was like that other lady. It was like she was reading my journal."
Mm,
And the thing that I love about that is so many times in group, especially when I've just been betrayed and I'm trying to stabilize, we're in that fight, flight, or freeze place, and oftentimes we're in that freeze place, and we know that with trauma that our broken area of our brain, which is our speech and language center, goes offline. We don't have that, and so when I show up in group and somebody can say, "This is my experience," and put it into words, we can connect with that and go, "Oh, yeah, me too." So as we're talking about that rebuilding of ourselves, of our foundation, of our identity in the group as we reflect back, this is a space for learning and growing and really consolidating our experience of, "Oh, yeah, here's me making sense of it." And I had a client this last week who came and said, "My group this week, my 12-step group, we were going through step 4. That was super triggering."
mm.
Yeah, okay, so let's pull out the book that you were using. Let's look at it. It was a book that had some codependency and co-addict language, and so we went through it and said, "How can we reframe this? Let's look through the PTSD lens," and we went through it, and she was so relieved. Now, if she goes back to her group or if she talking to somebody who says, "This is really hard for me," she has that tool, and so going to group and somebody saying, "Hey, this is what my therapist and I talked about. I had a really hard time with this." That's a gift. That's a gift that we get from connecting with others who get it.
And I think what you just described there is collective healing.
Yes.
Right? A concept that I've learned or something that I read or something I talked to my therapist. Therapy then expands because we're learning and we're all growing together. And what one person may learn, they share with another person, and it's positive growth, contagious growth.
That's beautiful, Dr. Skinner. Is there anything that you want to share or add to our conversation before we wrap up today?
The biggest thing I would say is if you've been flying solo, you don't have to fly solo. There are meaningful resources. There's people who care. And what you'll discover is that you too can help another person. Your presence, your story, your growth will be motivating for someone else. And so, one of the ways out of trauma is actually finding a way to nurture and help other people. And interestingly enough, that's another benefit of groups. I've sat back and I've observed groups, and I have found that when you find people who've been in so much internal pain and then they reach out, they're like, and I was able to share with this person and they understood and they were just in this phase that I was in a year ago and now I was able to share. That's the power that I cannot describe other than when it happens, MaryAnn, good things happen. And again, when you're serving other people and you're lifting other people and you're supporting other people, it also lends to your internal confidence.
Mm, I love that because oftentimes I can get some big blinders on for myself of this is where I'm at and this is what I'm going through. But I can hear somebody else talk about their problem and be like, "Well, why don't you do this? And what about this?" And we can see each other more objectively oftentimes than we can see ourselves. And seeing that in group, "Oh, I can see that going on over here.
Yeah.
There's some answers that maybe I needed, but I wasn't seeing it well enough." Or it's given me a chance, even like a little mini relief of, I don't have to worry about mine right now. I can focus on what she's saying. And there's a lot of pain there. Wow, that's so hard. And maybe I'm not even feeling my own pain, but I can sure feel her pain and I can see and witness her pain because I might be kind of numb to my own.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Skinner. This has been a great conversation. And to our listeners and viewers, if you don't have a group, please give yourself an opportunity to go find one. And not every group is made equal. And so I love Patrick Carnes's recommendation. He says, go to a group 6 times and then decide if you hate it or love it. And especially with groups that are free, that are 12 step, they're as healthy as the people that show up. And so sometimes there are some personalities, sometimes there are groups that just don't fit. And that's okay. Find another one because there are lots of groups and have compassion with yourself. This is a hard journey, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, spending this time here, and may you be blessed. Thank you.
Thank you.